Well, welcome everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I will let you know that I grew up in Texas, and I'm a little travel fatigued, and so when I get fatigued, sometimes that comes out. So I hope that you'll be able to understand my accent okay. Again, very excited to be here. I'm going to focus a little bit on the digital skills that make up 21st century skills, and I'm going to focus on what leadership maybe can do about that. Try to run through several things really fast to stimulate discussion as we go through the day. And we'll have a little bit of time at the end of my presentation to talk about that. And let's see, Robert, if you'll just let me know if I'm running too long.
Yeah.
And we'll move right into some discussion pieces. By the way, I played hockey for 4 years, so that you didn't know that. And I was goalie every time because it was pickup and intramural at Dartmouth College, and I couldn't skate. So they put me in front of the goal, and everybody else got to play.
We'll include that in next year.
Yeah, right. And so I have a few scars to show from there as well. But it did take the place of American football for me when the season was over and then we moved into the winter. And so I got the bug. I definitely got the bug. So I'm going to assume we're here with a shared mission, and that's preparing a digital generation of learners. I'm going to assume we understand that this is no longer your granddad's Buick. You know, we're actually in a new era, and just rote work with knowledge, information, communications is not even where it's at any longer. As I think about what I need to hire for ISTE, and I look forward, I look for people that can innovate, people that think creatively. I think Lucas Films probably doesn't need very many rote kinds of workers any longer. And so while you still can work in the knowledge economy in some of those roles, if you want to work when you want to, where you want to, with a great deal of satisfaction and a good salary, you'd best be looking at that sweet spot, which is now innovation and creativity. That's the world we're in, and that's who's going to lead the economy. The innovation is critical to that. Also, this is what I think ISTE does best, is I think we build capacity for people to transform, and we argue some in the States, especially in some of the southern states, about Charles Darwin's science. But I'll tell you, when it comes to organizations and institutions, Charlie had it right. If just because you're on top now, or just because you're doing well now, doesn't mean that that's going to be the case. And what that translates to for leaders in education and in business is that the great manager of an established system is no longer the leader we're looking for. Just like for workers, we're looking for those with creativity and innovation, we're looking for leaders that can transform the system. We're not doing an adequate job in North America with education. So the leaders we need are not those efficient managers of a system that's already established, but rather we need those with some vision and the ability to cause people to follow or join. It's really that joining that sets aside this transformation from some of the early ones, including the Industrial Revolution. Before, you look for that charismatic individual leader to lead you out of the woods. We've got to all work to get out of the woods now, but we've got to have a leader that will share that leadership and that will bring forward and that will take all the wisdom in the room in order to make those adaptations to a changing environment. So leading is different in the digital age, and I'll talk more about that as we go through. A little bit about ISTE. We're really an education and learning effectiveness organization. We're not techno-terrorists. We like technology, but that's probably a little bit of a misnomer to say we're the International Society for Technology and Education. In fact, what we love about technology is it enables strategies along the right-hand side of this chart. So most of us in here were successful along this left hand, and you never abandon these strategies because sometimes they're the appropriate strategy. But see this gray hair, bags under my eyes? That's trying to do those strategies on the right side. So I spent 12 and a half years in the classroom. I remember a basic secondary math class where we assigned 2 teachers to 30 kids because we were going to do those strategies on the right side over there. And without technology, we couldn't do them. And now I see teachers doing those strategies every day. We built this slide on faith. But quite frankly, we've got research data now that says if you work along the right-hand side of that chart, you engage more students, they demonstrate different kinds of talents, 21st century talents, that when you work only in this mode, you don't get. You don't get engagement of the students, you don't get students showing some of the great team leadership talents, for example. And so the reason we love technology is because it gives us an environment that enables the strategies along the right-hand side of that chart. And it's all about student learning, student productivity, and then eventually workforce productivity. So this is who we are. We claim that we're a worldwide network of leaders and leaders to be in education and technology. We've got direct individual members. Affiliates are really our strength. We have about 8 or 9 in Canada right now. And those are independent organizations who have elected to affiliate with ISTE because our mission aligns that well. And that gives us a reach of about 150,000 professionals and policymakers. We believe the corporate sector is a legitimate partner in transforming schools. So most of the people on that chart are our members. Obviously, Pearson's been strong and a long leader. Discovery Education, Dell, Smart, certainly Epson. Those are our members in the corporate category too, because we know they've got a wisdom, they've got an idea of where the industry's going, but they've also taken some of our best educators. So we find some of our best people working for Kathy, for example. And so we believe that sector shouldn't dominate the agenda, but they certainly should contribute. They're going to be using our products. So we think that that's an important piece. Our membership organized themselves in special interest groups, and I'll talk more about those a little later. And we do almost nothing alone. I mean, also as I look at that chart, I begin to see a whole lot of collaborators with ISTE. And so we're pleased to be here with Robert and Mindshare Learning, because that's the way we work. If we can find a network that's established that we can help be successful, then that's a whole lot smarter way to use your efforts than trying to go one-off and try to hit everybody. So we partner everywhere we go. You'll hear from Kathy about the Partnership for 21st Century Skills, who's been a really good ally to us as well. So these are just some of the special interest groups or networks of interest or communities of interest that have self-formed within our membership. And this is not even all of them. This is just some that I thought you'd be interested in seeing. Probably our largest, not sure if this is still true, but teacher educators is one. We're about 6,000, 6,500 strong in just that special interest group for teacher educators. So what do we really do? Well, we do networking really, really well. We bring people together. We advocate, and that's really, we strengthened that competency in the last 10 years. We think we do thought leadership in a unique way, and of course capacity building. So what we do is people give of us freely because we're nonprofit and all that good stuff. So they give us their expertise. We try to repackage it and return it to the field so that the entire education community can use it. So we do conferences, we do webinars, we do publications, we do. So that's what we do, is we think we're in a special place where people are willing to give us stuff without charging us for it. We can repackage it and give it away efficiently to the entire community. So that's what we think we do. And some of those contributions, are any of you in Denver last year? Anybody here? So we have a conference that draws about 18,000 people. And I won't go into detail on that. You've got a little flyer in your packet. But it's the best window on the world around if you want to see what's happening in technology and education worldwide. We draw over 70 countries, and in 2011 it'll be in Philadelphia. But we also do conferences and networking activities in other places in the world as well. Singapore with the Ministry of Education, and certainly in Australia we have about 10 affiliates in that area, and we participate in their conference. We do a Dubai conference every spring, looking at Latin America pretty heavily. But the most important thing is we don't only gather people together face to face. For example, those are just some of the virtual networks that we maintain. It's a little dry mouth here, I'm sorry. And those are important places because that's where ISTE members are. It's online and interacting with each other. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention to start with, my bags didn't come in. So they're still...
Mine did.
No, you're still good. So this is not disrespect at all. This is all I have. We have the largest education presence in Second Life right now. And our book list has just gone to ebooks, so we're really excited about that. So the resources keep coming. We produce pretty and important stuff, but I talked about that capacity building. If we're not changing the capacity of individuals or institutions to use that stuff, and that means shoulder to shoulder in the trenches, then we don't think we're doing but half the job. I mentioned that we're unique in that we think the corporate sector are legitimate partners. We have about 65 members that are corporate. We do almost nothing alone. Partners is the way we go. We think we're the critical partner in digital age education. And our greatest strength is our neutrality and objectivity. So far, we've weathered the economic downturn, and we've been able to stay independent and hustle for our resources so that way you're not sold out to anybody individually, and that's really important. When we revised our standards, and we did that over the last 3 years, we learned some things, we think, and it reinforced some other things. But what we do know is that regardless of what culture you're dealing with, what nation you're dealing with, or they want to develop human capacity. So you can be in Jamaica where they got no natural resources. You can be in China where they've got tons, in Australia where they got tons of natural resources. But everybody's after that human resource and developing it to the fullest. They know that's education, and increasingly they know that requires innovation with technology. And so these are what ISTE sort of hangs its hat on. It says, you better pay attention to these, or you're probably not going to get where you want to go in terms of return on your investment in education. We have a whole area on essential conditions. And those came out of the administrator standards, because as we drew practicing school leaders together to tell us what it requires to be a good school leader in this century, they wouldn't talk to us about competencies until we talked about the conditions that need to exist in the system. And in fact, we fought for about 2 days thinking we were smarter than they were, that they proved that wrong in a hurry. And so we spent a few days talking about what those essential conditions are. So if you go to our website, these are spelled out. And often when I start with a professional development effort for leaders and try to look at the competencies, we end up focusing more on these essential conditions than we do on the competencies of the administrators. And so I think it's important that you visit the website and look at those as you move through. We also asked what's new as we did the revision. The number one thing was globalization, multiculturalism, and competitiveness that we see in education today. Learning landscape that's increasingly digital. The digital divide was a real interesting one. A decade ago, when we did the original standards, we were worried about the digital divide being an earning divide. We said students, when they go out to compete for jobs, they'll be at a disadvantage if they don't have digital skills, connectivity. Now what educators are telling us is that it starts a lot earlier than that we see a serious learning divide if students don't have access and don't have those skills. So it certainly will translate into an earning divide in the long run, but the concern is much earlier now, because the digital divide impacts how rich a student's education might be. And that wasn't really the case a decade ago, but it's really the case today. So the digital divide is a major concern. Obviously, we've got new tools and new structures. And then the implications of the current accountability strategies was the other piece. So this is what is really different from a decade ago, according to our thousands of educators that contributed to our standards revision. From 37 countries, I might add. We went international on the revision of our standards. So speaking of standards, what do? Well, it's that unifying framework. And I apologize a little bit because I know many of you have seen this video before, but I can't find one that describes better what happens if you haven't got that shared vision and the unified focus for your use of technology.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds,
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job. job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
So bringing technology ideas together and making them to go where you want them to go is a really important feature. And so I applaud the council for saying Canada is now going to attend 21st century skills. I think that's extremely important. So the standards, and you have a little flyer in your packet. We think of standards or frameworks as a package. It's the competencies, and those are important, but it's the conditions that need to exist if you're expecting benefit from that. It's the implementation resources, and we've spent a ton of ISTE's money and the government's money developing resources for 21st century skills. And it's support for assessment, and that's where we have the most work to do. Is assessing higher order 21st century skills is still a tough, and so far, a people-intensive activity. And so that's, if you want to work somewhere that makes a difference, work on that assessment piece. We do a very inclusive process. So besides the fact that I wanted to focus a little on digital skills for the 21st century, I also wanted to talk about what's happening worldwide, because we'll hear a little more about what's happening more locally in just a little bit. So it's about using technology to learn. In the first round, it was learning to use technology. But now it's using technology to learn. So our global digital age learning skills, we think, first of all, the killer app is learning. As students move through their lifetime, as they move through their careers, if they're not able to learn, they're at a really serious disadvantage. So we focused on learning in a digital environment. And so that's what we're asking. What are those skills that students need to learn effectively and live productively as the world becomes more digital? And in the U.S., they call them the National Education Technology Standards because they're used throughout the nation. And I mentioned the original set were learning to use the technology, focused on tools. The new set is much higher order skills in a digital environment with almost this entire set of standards packed into one standard this time, and the rest of them are talking about higher order. So we talk about creativity and innovation, communication and collaboration, research and information fluency, critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, digital citizenship, and then of course you need to know how to operate the systems also. You need to know the concepts behind those. What's interesting about that is this was ISTE's take, but I'm telling you, there's consensus around the world. Why we can't get on board and go forward with those is interesting to me. We work a lot of places. In fact, last week I was in Mexico City. Our deputy CEO was in South Africa. Our CFO was in Abu Dhabi, and our senior director for strategic initiatives was in Hangzhou, China. That was on one specific day. And so we work a lot outside the U.S. We worked with Malaysia and helped develop their first draft of student standards. Notice the consistency with the skills that I put up there a little earlier. They took a little different tact on it, but if you look at that, it's the same skills. It was a broad-based team, really inclusive process. We did a similar thing in Costa Rica. And then if you look at Costa Rica, they organized them just a little differently. But if you look at the skills they're talking about, you see the same words come up over and over again. I love this one. This is my pride and joy as Costa Rica. They did a beautiful framework to describe things conceptually and everything. That's really good. So let's look at something closer to our system, like Australia. There's almost a one-to-one, with the exception that they took critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making and put it in even as a higher goal, not just a digital skill, but as an overall national goal. But other than that, they're one for one, almost a homogeneous mapping, right, of skills. And this is all around the world. So it really doesn't matter where you go. And you'll hear later about the framework for 21st century skills, which is the partnership for 21st century skills efforts. And if you'll notice, the learning and innovation skills and the information, media, and technology skills, those two blocks right there are the same standards that I talked about first, are the same ones that are in Malaysia, are the same ones that are in Costa Rica, are the same ones that are in Australia. So people around the world are working in that effort. So are people in Mexico, in the Arab Gulf region, in Japan. And then that has implications for teachers, obviously. And I'm not going to do a lot with teachers, but I will tell you that we did a similar thing. We took our standards from last time, we revamped it completely, and what we saw were things like inspiring creativity and innovation. We saw things like co-learning, where teachers aren't expected to get one treatment of professional development and stay ahead of the kids the rest of their lives. But rather they ask that student, how did you do that? Show me that. They learn from their colleagues. If they don't know something, the students see them transparently going to their learning community and learning a skill themselves instantaneously or a concept. So that's the kind of thing that we see out of teachers now, that modeling of 21st century teaching, 21st century learning. And there are other efforts around the world to work on teachers. People understand that if you want your students to achieve, your teachers need to achieve. Some of our most satisfying work is with UNESCO with their ICT framework, competency framework for teachers. And I think Kathy will probably mention guides with the content areas, but that across the curriculum stuff is really important as well. So let's look at moving toward digital age leadership. So we refreshed our standards. In the U.S., we call most of our school leaders administrators, obviously. And outside the U.S., they're often called different things. But think of school leaders or education leaders. Look at the words that pop out. Inspire and lead. Create a culture. Ensure innovation. Professional learning and innovation. Continuously improve. Model. Those are the kinds of things administrators or school leaders are expected to do now. And then when we look at innovation for digital age learning, this is the part that's really the most frustrating for me right now. Because I can go to a lawyer, and a lot of our policymakers leading education are lawyers, and I can talk about these things, and they get it, and they're engaged, and they're pumped, and they're ready to go, and they're going to move forward, and they're ready to bring education into the 21st century. We almost even get money for these kinds of things. But this is innovation around the edges of learning. Even online assessment is. Even virtual schooling and bringing resources to kids electronically. Those are still innovations around the edges. So where those of us that are sophisticated in education, in facilitating student learning, have got to work, is at the heart of it, changing the learning experience. And this is not easy. And when you talk to those lawyers about this part of innovation, it glaze over. You don't have any idea what you're talking about, except those who have had some experience with students in classrooms and with learning, or other populations. So what does it look like? We want students using tools available to them outside of school, but using them in school for learning. We want to see if somebody's studying science, that they use the tools that scientists use today, not the stuff that we've got in our labs and schools. We want to see them working collaboratively. We want student learning, student productivity to be a social event. We want to see simulations and gaming, things that engage them. We want to see a teacher that models 21st century learning, him or herself, and 21st century teaching. And I talked about what that professional might look like when they don't understand something or don't have a skill or a concept, how they go about demonstrating to kids that they use 21st century tools to bring themselves up to speed. The idea of co-learning, assessment for learning rather than assessment of learning. Kathy can talk about that too, because she's been engaged in that a long time. But also, being sure we've made a lot of progress with learning and making that to a social event. We're making progress with teaching, quite frankly. So that's becoming a social event. But you know, our assessment still pulls them out of that environment, sits them in a cubicle, asks them to respond to tiny little responses. And we've got to make that a social activity too. I want to know how the kid acts in a team setting, where they're a follower, or where they're a leader, or where they're a recorder, or where they're a facilitator, or where they're an information resource. I want to see our assessment move to a social learning setting as well. And it should be a little less obvious that you're in an assessment mode when you're doing it. So that's what I want changed. And all that other stuff's important. Learning management systems, data management systems, online assessment, all that's important stuff. But it is innovation around the edges. So in addition to this, which is important to bring the enterprise into the 21st century, we've got to look at what it looks like to have a learning experience in the 21st century as well. And all I can say is shame on us. We have a consensus on what those skills are. No need to feud about those. You do need to localize them. You do need to argue about them a little bit and decide what you're going to put your efforts behind and make sure you're all on board for that. But shame on us if we don't change the learning experience. If we spend all our time innovating around the edges and our students still have the same experience when they come to school, then shame on us. Because using technology is significant school reform. It's all about leadership, and I'll give you 5 challenges. Study those digital learners, foster creative and innovative thinking, inventive thinking, understand the tools and strategies that are available, sustain our learning and development, and prepare to contribute to an increasingly multicultural setting. We're working with many people, many countries who are preparing their teachers for export. Now, right now we're at an economic downturn, so the U.S. is not importing teachers at the rate that they will be again. And Canada and Western Europe, they're not importing them. But I'll tell you, Jamaica, the Philippines, they're preparing their teachers against international standards so that they can fill our teaching spots. So you might as well get used to that. They may come physically or they may come virtually, but you're going to have to deal in those multicultural environments in an increasing way. And then what's true is we've got to measure, we've got to monitor. We've got to be able to say at the end of the day what's better because we decided to use digital strategies and information tools. I will encourage you to do a shameless moment of that our board has removed all barriers to membership to ISTE, practically, because $49 a year for an online membership is tremendous. If you have an email address outside the U.S., you can get this price. If you're inside the U.S., you can't. But so I would encourage you to look at membership. And now I'd like to hear some from you guys.